On a quiet Sunday evening in the small town of Crestwood, Indiana, Susan and Michael Carter sat in their living room, enjoying the last moments of their weekend. Their two children, 10-year-old Emily and 6-year-old Jacob, had already gone to bed. The family had just returned from a neighborhood gathering where laughter and conversation filled the air. It was a normal night until everything changed. At 6:45 a.m. the next morning, Susan's sister, Rachel, received a troubling phone call. Michael hadn't shown up for work. Rachel immediately knew something was wrong. Michael was never late, she later recalled. He was the type to show up 20 minutes early, every single day. Rachel tried calling Susan. No answer. She dialed again. Still nothing. Concern growing, she decided to drive to their house. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed something strange. The front door was slightly open. A chill ran down her spine. She hesitated before stepping inside, her voice shaking as she called out, "Susan? Michael?" Silence. Then she stepped forward and froze. Lying in the hallway, just past the living room, was Michael Carter. Blood pooled around his head, his body motionless. Rachel's scream echoed through the house. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, her hands trembling. As she waited for emergency responders, she forced herself to move deeper into the home. She found Susan in the master bedroom. The sight was horrific. Susan had been brutally beaten. A deep wound on her forehead suggested she had been struck with something heavy. Blood splattered the walls and sheets, but the worst discovery was yet to come. Rachel rushed into Emily and Jacob's shared bedroom. Emily lay lifeless on her bed, a deep gash on her neck. Jacob was nowhere to be found. A frantic search ensued. Then, in the closet, she saw movement. She pulled open the door. There, curled into a tight ball, was Jacob, his tiny frame trembling, his hands pressed over his mouth as if trying to make himself disappear. His pajamas were stained with blood. Rachel fell to her knees, gathering the boy into her arms. "You're safe now," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if that was true. The police arrived within minutes. Officers immediately secured the house and began processing the scene. It was clear, this was no random home invasion. Someone had come with a purpose. Detective Mark Reynolds, a 20-year veteran of the force, took one look at the crime scene and knew they were dealing with something brutal. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong, he later recalled. This was personal. The level of violence, it was like the killer wanted to erase this family. Crime scene investigators combed through the house. They found no signs of forced entry, no missing valuables, nothing that indicated a burglary. But then, in Emily's room, they discovered something chilling. Near the foot of her bed on the carpet was a single footprint, and beside it, a message scrawled in blood. "I am still here." The words sent a shiver through every officer in the room. Whoever had done this wanted to be known, and worse, they might not be finished. The discovery of the blood-scrawled message sent waves of unease through the department. "I am still here." What did it mean? Was the killer watching? Would they strike again? Detective Reynolds immediately ordered a canvass of the neighborhood. Officers knocked on doors, speaking to anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. One neighbor, an elderly man named George Holloway, mentioned something strange. "I was up late," he said, rubbing his chin. "Sometime after midnight, I thought I saw someone walking past the Carter house. A man, tall, just standing there watching." "Did you see his face?" one officer asked. Holloway shook his head. "Too dark, but there was something off about him. He wasn't in a hurry, just waiting." The information was unsettling. Was this the killer? Had he stalked the family before making his move? As detectives combed through the house, they found another disturbing clue. On the windowsill in the master bedroom, just above Susan's bed, was a single, dirty handprint. It was smudged but still clear enough to analyze. Forensics rushed the evidence to the lab. Meanwhile, the surviving child, 6-year-old Jacob, was taken to the hospital for evaluation. Rachel, his aunt, sat beside him, gently holding his hand as doctors checked his vitals. Despite his young age, Jacob had witnessed something horrific, but when questioned, he barely spoke. Instead, he just kept repeating the same phrase. "The shadow man came." His voice was hollow, distant. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Rachel whispered. Jacob's tiny fingers trembled. The shadow man. He was standing in the doorway. He didn't have a face. A chill ran through Rachel. The police weren't sure what to make of Jacob's words. Was it a trick of his young mind, trying to make sense of something terrifying? Or was there something deeper? While Jacob recovered, detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the timeline. The Carters had returned home around 9:30 p.m. The house showed no signs of forced entry. That meant one of two things. One, the killer entered while they were inside. Two, the killer was already there. But there was one more possibility, one that made everyone uneasy. Had the Carters unknowingly let the killer in? As investigators dug into the couple's past, they discovered something troubling. Michael had recently fired an employee from his small construction business, a man named Eric Dalton. Dalton had a history of violent outbursts. Employees described him as unpredictable, one moment calm, the next seething with rage. One worker recalled a conversation that now seemed chilling in hindsight. "I remember after he got fired, he was furious," the worker said. "He kept saying, 'People think they can just throw me away? They're wrong. One day, they'll see.'" Could Eric Dalton be the shadow that had loomed over the Carter family? Detectives needed to find him. But when they arrived at his last known address, they found the apartment abandoned. Clothes were left behind, food still in the fridge, but Dalton was gone. It was as if he had vanished. And then, 3 nights later, it happened again. The call came in just after 2 a.m. A frantic woman, barely able to speak through her sobs, told the 911 dispatcher that someone had broken into her home. "There's blood everywhere," she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know if they're still here." Officers arrived at the scene within minutes. It was only 6 miles from the Carter house. Inside, they found another horror. The victims, Daniel and Laura Hayes, a married couple in their late 30s. Their bodies were discovered in the bedroom, brutally bludgeoned, the same level of violence, the same sheer rage. But one detail stood out. Unlike the Carter family, this time, there were no children in the home. Instead, the caller, Laura's sister Megan, had been staying over for the night. She had fallen asleep in the guest room, unaware of the nightmare unfolding down the hall. It was the sound of something heavy, she later told police, like something falling, and then footsteps. Megan had locked her door and dialed 911, unable to do anything else. When officers searched the house, they found something horrifying. Another message, this time scratched into the wooden floor near the victim's bed. "You let me in." Detective Reynolds was at the crime scene within the hour. There was no doubt now, this was the same killer, the same level of brutality, and worse, he was escalating. The crime scene team moved quickly. They took samples, lifted fingerprints, and searched for any trace of the murderer. Then came the moment of truth. One of the officers approached Detective Reynolds. His face was pale. "We got a match." The bloody handprint from the Carter house, the fingerprints from the Hayes home, they belonged to one person, Eric Dalton, the man who had disappeared, the man who had sworn revenge. And now he had proven he wasn't finished. The manhunt begins. An arrest warrant was issued immediately. Dalton was officially named the prime suspect in the brutal murders. His face was plastered across news stations, his name repeated in every broadcast. Authorities are searching for Eric Dalton, a 42-year-old former construction worker, now wanted in connection with multiple homicides. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Tips flooded in. Some claimed to have seen him at gas stations. Others thought he was hiding in abandoned houses. But Dalton was careful. He left no trail. Days passed, then a week. And then, something unexpected. A letter delivered to the Crestwood Police Department. No return address. Just a few words written in shaky black ink. "You will never catch me. The game isn't over." Detective Reynolds gritted his teeth as he read the note. Dalton wasn't just running, he was playing. And he had no intention of stopping. The taunting letter sent shockwaves through the department. "You will never catch me. The game isn't over." Detective Reynolds slammed the paper down onto his desk. The arrogance, the confidence, it sent a chill through him. Dalton wasn't just evading capture. He was enjoying it. The message made one thing clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. Dalton had a sick thrill in terrorizing the town, keeping everyone on edge. And worse, there was no telling when he would strike again. But then, a break. 3 days after receiving the letter, an employee at a roadside diner outside of Crestwood called in a tip. A man matching Dalton's description had come in late at night. He was dirty, disheveled, his clothes stained, his face unshaven. He looked off, the employee recalled. Kept looking over his shoulder, ate real fast, paid in cash, and left. Security footage confirmed it. Dalton had been there, and he had made a mistake. Investigators zeroed in on a single detail, the brand of cigarettes he had purchased at the counter. It was a rare brand, not sold in most places. Detectives quickly checked other gas stations and convenience stores in the area, searching for receipts, security footage, anything that might track his movements. Then, a gas station clerk came forward. "He was here last night," she told police. "Bought a pack of cigarettes, some snacks, took off on foot." The surveillance tape showed Dalton walking out of the store, heading toward the nearby woods. A search team was assembled immediately. Armed officers and tracking dogs combed the dense forest behind the gas station, moving carefully. For hours, they found nothing. Then, near a small abandoned hunting cabin, one of the dogs began barking wildly. Inside the cabin, officers found clear signs of recent activity: discarded food wrappers, empty water bottles. And on the table, in the dust, someone had written a message with their finger: "Not yet." Dalton had been there, and once again, he had slipped away. The night he returned, the town of Crestwood was gripped with fear. People locked their doors, installed extra security, and avoided going out after dark. Everyone was waiting for the next attack. Then, on a cold Friday night, just past midnight, it happened. A 911 call came in from a frantic teenage girl. "There's someone outside," she whispered. "He's watching the house." The dispatcher kept her on the line, trying to calm her. "Can you see what he looks like?" The girl hesitated. "He's just standing there, in the backyard. Oh my God, he's moving." Then, the line went dead. Patrol officers were dispatched immediately. When they arrived, they found the back door of the house wide open. Inside, the girl's family, her parents and younger brother, were completely unharmed. But the girl, 17-year-old Lisa Howard, was missing. And on the kitchen wall, smeared in something dark, perhaps dirt, perhaps blood, was a single word: "Mine." Dalton hadn't just broken in, he had taken her. A race against time. The next 48 hours were crucial. Authorities launched the largest manhunt in Crestwood history. Every available officer, every resource was focused on one goal: finding Lisa Howard before it was too late. Surveillance footage from a nearby street camera showed a shadowy figure carrying something, or someone, into the woods. It was him. Dalton had taken her into the forest. Detective Reynolds and his team moved fast. They had a map, they had search teams, but what they didn't have was time. Because if Dalton followed his usual pattern, Lisa wouldn't survive the night. Detective Reynolds gripped the flashlight tightly as he and his team advanced into the thick, moonlit forest. Every second counted. Lisa Howard was out there, alive, but for how long? The tracker dogs led the way, their noses low to the damp ground. Then suddenly, one of them barked and sprinted ahead, its handler barely able to keep up. A trail, footprints, and then something chilling. A scream, faint, distant, but real. Lisa was still alive. Reynolds broke into a run, heart pounding as he followed the sound. The footprints led deeper into the trees, toward an old forgotten hunting cabin, the same one they had searched days ago. This time, they wouldn't let Dalton slip away. The team moved into formation. Reynolds signaled, and officers quietly surrounded the structure. Through a crack in the boarded-up window, he saw movement inside. Dalton. Lisa was tied to a chair, her face streaked with tears, her mouth gagged. Dalton stood beside her, sharpening a hunting knife. Reynolds didn't wait. "Drop the weapon." Dalton spun around, eyes wide with shock. But instead of surrendering, he lunged, not at the officers, but at Lisa. A single gunshot rang out. Dalton stumbled, gasping, clutching his chest. For a moment, he stood there, swaying, as if his body refused to believe it was over. Then, with a final, ragged breath, he collapsed. It was over. Lisa sobbed as officers untied her, her body shaking with relief. Reynolds knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said softly. "It's over." The nightmare that had gripped Crestwood had finally come to an end. The town of Crestwood slowly began to heal.